Hey everyone, welcome to our very first chapter review video. This video is going to help us get ready for our upcoming pre-algebra test on chapter 1, which covers everything from whole numbers, operations and rounding, to PEMDAS, variables, and expressions. This video is going to cover all of it, but it has been broken up into two parts. So this first part is going to cover whole numbers, operations, and rounding, and then there will be a second part posted that will cover the order of operations, variables, and expressions. While you're using this video to prepare, I have a couple ideas that can make it more productive for you. First of all, you can watch the whole thing from start to finish. That's my number one suggestion so that you're not caught off guard by any surprises on the test. Or you can just fast forward and skip around to the parts that you feel you need the most help with. So this really is your tool to use how you want. Now, some study tips we can use to help us prepare. First, we can reread the notes packets in our binder to go over some important tips we may have forgotten. We can review our graded assignments and homework that's saved in those binders. We can complete extra practice problems that are located in the book. And we can use our study guide that we're going to get in class as a practice test. Now, the first topic we're going to cover is how to write our numbers in standard and in word form. Now, first we're going to write our whole numbers in words. Always read the directions very carefully so you know what they're asking. When you see a comma, like we have here, that is going to tell us where we need to include our period name. So that will make sure we label our place values correctly. From there, we're going to identify that that first comma represents the thousands period. So where that comma is in our number, we're going to replace that with the word thousand. Then we're going to look at all the numbers that come before the comma. So that would be 42, and we're going to write it just like that. After the comma is the number 9. So the same exact way we would read it to ourselves in our head, we're going to write it like that as well. Now our next number, we actually have 2 commas. So that means the first one we see is in the millions place, and the digits before it are 47. So our written word form would come out, will start as 47 million. Then in the next period, we have the number 33. And the comma that comes after us tells us that represents 33,000. So it's 47,033,000. And the last period, we don't have to put the period name in the description, but we do want to write out exactly how we would read it, 107. So when you're reading your numbers, make sure to read them carefully to yourself first. Now we're going to go backwards and write our word form in standard form. First looking for those period names. In this case, 1,000, that will be where my first comma goes. The digits before that are described are 640. So I'm going to write that exactly how I read it, 640, and then replace the word 1,000 with the comma. After that period name, we're going to read the rest of the number. When I read it out loud, it's read as 801. So I'm going to write exactly that. Now in our next word form, we have 16 million. Million is a period name, so it gets replaced with a comma. Then we have 405. So we're going to write 405 and then a comma to represent the thousands period. So the last part of our number is 16, 016. The next section we're going to cover is addition and subtraction problems. In our first example, we have 50,000 minus 17,289. The little details are what are going to help us avoid mistakes in problems like these. So the first thing I notice is that I'm subtracting from a number that has mostly zeros in the top. So I'm going to have to regroup. Now, when I first regroup, the first 0 in the ones place, I'm going to cross that out and try to borrow from my neighbor next door. But he's also a 0. So I cross him out, go to the next neighbor, another 0. Cross him out, go to the next 0. Still another 0. So then I go to my last digit, and finally I have enough to borrow. So I'm going to borrow from that 5. And then that becomes a 4. All of the other place values we're borrowing to make 10, but then sharing it with the neighbor to the right. So all the numbers in the middle become a 9, and the ones place becomes a 10. So 10 minus 9 is 1. 9 minus 8 is 1. 9 minus 2 is 7. 9 minus 7 is 2. And 4 minus 1 is 3. Now, when we're done with a subtraction problem, my best advice is to check your work by adding your answer to the number you subtracted. So here I would add 32,711 plus 17,289. We're working backwards, and if we've done our problem correctly, we should end up back with the number we started with, which was 50,000. So when I add up these two amounts, 3 plus 1 is 5. I'm right back where I started, so I know I have the right answer. I don't even have to wait for my teacher to grade it to know that I'm correct. Now, the next problem is an addition problem, but it has multiple add-ins, 4 to be exact. So I'm first going to line up my numbers very carefully by place value, making sure the columns are straight and neat. And I'm actually going to cross out my numbers as I write them down so I don't forget to include any numbers, and so I don't include any more than once. Now that I've written down and organized all of my numbers by place value, I'm going to add each column up and be careful to regroup neatly so I don't forget to add anything in that needs to be included. So my first column equals 20. The next column is 19, carry the 1. 7 plus 7 is 14, plus 1 more is 15, and 7 plus 2 is 9. So our total sum for this problem was 9,590. Now, for our word problem, a pair of headphones that regularly sells for $547 is discounted by $99 in a sale. What is the sale price? So our original price is $547, and the word discounted tells us that we are going to be subtracting. If we're discounting, we're taking some of the money off of the original price. We love a good discount, and our discount is $99. So to find the sale price, we're going to start with the original price, $547, and subtract 99. We have to regroup because we can't do 7 minus 9. And once we regroup, we get 17 minus 9 is 8. Then we regroup again. 13 minus 9 is 4. And 4 minus nothing in the hundreds place in our second number is also 4. So the sale price of these headphones is $448. Now to check my work, I'm going to add that to the discount, which was $99, and it should bring me back to my original pre-sale price. And it does, $547. So I know the price of these headphones is $547 originally, but $448 as the sale price. Next up, we are going to work on a perimeter problem. Mr. Magoo is installing a fence. We need to know how many feet of fencing are needed to enclose the entire yard. Now, fence means we're going to be finding the perimeter, the distance around the outside of the yard to enclose the full shape. And perimeter uses addition to combine the side lengths and both of the widths of the shape. So length plus width plus width. In this diagram here, Mr. Magoo's backyard is labeled with the 4 lengths of each side of the yard. So we're going to take those lengths, those measurements, and we are going to add them all up. So we have the total distance around the yard. So when I add them up, I'm going to make sure I line up my place value columns carefully and then add each column one at a time. So 8 plus 2 is 10. 7 plus 7 is 14, plus 10 is 24, and 2 plus 1 is 3. So the total distance around the outside perimeter of the yard is 340 feet. That means we need 340 feet of fencing to enclose the entire yard. Now we're going to work on a word problem about a car's odometer, which is what measures the miles that car has driven in its life. So when Rory and Dean started their road trip, the odometer read 55,492. When the trip was over, the odometer read 59,320. How many miles did they drive on their trip? So they're asking us to find the difference between the number of miles the car started with and the number of miles that were on the car when the road trip was over. So to find the difference, we're going to need to subtract. When we're subtracting, we're going to start with the ending amount, the number of miles that was on the odometer at the end of the trip. And then we're going to subtract, we're going to take away the miles that we started with, because those were already on the car's odometer before we began. Now, when we're subtracting, we want to regroup carefully. We have to turn the 0 into a 10 and borrow from the 10's place. 10 minus 2 is 8, but then we can't do 1 minus 9. So we're going to regroup a second time. 11 minus 9 is 2. Regroup a third time. 12 minus 4 is 8. 8 minus 5 is 3. And 5 minus 5 is 0. So the difference between where we started and where we ended is 3,828 miles. Now, to make sure that that difference that I found when I subtracted is correct, I am going to add my answer plus the number I subtracted and see if I get back to that starting number, 59,320. So I add 55,492 plus 3,828, our answer, and it brings us right back to 59,320. So we know our answer is perfectly calculated, and that means for the trip that Rory and Dean went on, they traveled a total 3,828 miles on that trip. So 3,828. And we want to make sure to always label our units. So I'm going to make sure to write out miles. Next, we're going to use a chart to answer the following question. How much louder is the sound of snoring than normal conversation? So if they're asking how much louder, we're finding the difference between two values. So we are going to subtract. Now, to get the information we need to answer this question, we're going to look at the chart and compare the sound of snoring to the sound of normal conversation. Now, snoring on our chart, that reaches a decibel of 88, and normal sounds, normal conversation, reaches 30 decibels. So to find the difference, we're going to subtract 88, the sound of snoring, 88 decibels, minus the 30 decibel volume of normal conversation, and the difference is 58 decibels. So that means when we are snoring, it's 58 decibels louder than when we're just talking normally. Now I'm going to check my work with addition, and it brings me back to 88, the number I started with. So I know my answer is correct, and the difference in the sound is 58 decibels. Snoring is 58 decibels louder than normal conversation. Next up, we're going to do some multiplication and division. Now, first up, Taylor's traveling 1,189 miles every week for 13 weeks. How many total miles did she travel? So because it's the same amount every week, we can use multiplication. We're going to multiply 1,189 times the number of weeks she's traveling, which is 13. Now we're going to start with the ones place, in that case, the 3, and we're going to multiply everything in the top by 3. 9 times 3 is 27. 8 times 3 is 24, plus the 2 we regrouped, that's 26. 1 times 3 is 3, plus 2 is 5, and 1 times 3 is 3. Now, we're done with the ones place. So we're going to add a 0 in the ones place at the bottom and move over to the tens. So 1 times 9 is 9, 1 times 8 is 8, 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 times 1 is 1. Now we're going to add these two partial products. 7 plus 0 is 7, 6 plus 9 is 15, 5 plus 8 plus 1 is 14, 3 plus 2 is 5, and 1. Now the 0 is the major key here. If we add it correctly, we get 15,457 miles she traveled in those 13 weeks. Next up, a area question. They're asking us to find the area of the rectangle below. So area is multiplication, length times width. Here they've given us the two measurements we need. We have 17 feet and 42 feet. So we're going to multiply those two dimensions together. 42 times 17. Remember, multiplication can be done in any order, but I like to put my larger number on the top. 2 times 7 is 14. 4 times 7 plus 1 is 29. Now remember, we cross out the ones place, add the 0 down below, and move over to the tens. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 4 is 4. Don't forget to add your two partial products at the end for 11 and 7. And then always check, is it reasonable? If I got 7,000, that would be a little odd and something I want to double check. But 714 is reasonable. And because it's area, I'm going to write 714 feet squared, or square feet. That's the correct measurement for area. Next, we're going to find the quotient, which means we're going to divide. So we're going to divide 2,286 divided by 7. That will help us find the quotient of 2,286 and 7. So can 7 go into 2? Nope, 0 times. Can 7 go into 22? 3 times, because 7 times 3 is 21. Now we find the difference there. It's 1. And then we bring down the next digit, which is 8. 7 goes into 18 2 times. We subtract and get a remainder of 4. And then we bring down the 6. 7 can go into 46 6 times. 7 times 6 is 42. When we subtract, we get a difference of 4. And there are no more numbers to bring down. So that 4 is going to come up and become our remainder. So when we divide, we get 326, remainder 4 as our quotient. To check our answers, we're going to multiply the quotient by the divisor. So 326 times 7. When we multiply that using our strategies that we've already practiced, we're going to get 2,282. But if you're wondering why it's not the exact same number we started with, it's because of that remainder. So we add the remainder back in at the very end, and that brings us to our starting point, 2,286. Good job. So that's our final answer, which means 326 remainder 4 is the quotient of 2,286 and 7. Next, 8 7th grade students were measured. What is their average height in inches? So average means we need to find the sum of all of the numbers that are in the set. In this case, all of the heights of those 8 7th graders. And then we need to divide that by the number of numbers in that set. So they've told us that there were 8 7th grade students measured. So we know that there are 8 numbers. So next, we need to find the sum of those 8 numbers. Now, to make sure I don't make any mistakes, I'm going to add these in 2 parts. So I'm going to start with the first 4 numbers and add those together. 61 plus 75 plus 65 plus 63. When I add up each place value one at a time and very carefully checking to make sure I don't make silly mistakes, I get 264. So now I'm going to add the other 4 numbers. Because remember, with addition, the grouping does not matter. So that's why I can add these in 2 different groups and then bring it all together for my total, and it won't affect the outcome. So when I add these numbers together, I also get 264. Funny the way that works out. So now that I have my 2 add-ins, I'm going to add those together to get the final total. 264 plus 264. When I finally add those up, I get 528. Now, that is not the answer. We don't have any 7th graders who are 528 inches tall. So we have to divide that by the number of numbers in the set, which was 8. Now, when I start off, 8 can go into 52 6 times. 8 times 6 is 48. And then when we subtract that from 52, we get a difference of 4. 52 minus 8 is 4. Then we bring down the 8, and we get 48. 8 can go into 48 6 times, nice and evenly. When we subtract, we get no remainder. So our final answer, the average of these 7th graders would be 66 inches tall. 5 foot 6 inches. So there's our average. And remember, we find that by adding all the numbers together, then dividing by the number of numbers. So our next topic we're going to cover is rounding whole numbers. Now we want to pay attention to the little details here. So first off, we want to make sure we identify the correct place value by reading our question carefully. So when we're rounding 64,367 to the hundreds, we first look at the hundreds place and then look to the neighbor next door on the right. The 6 tells us we need to raise the score. So that 3 is going to raise up to a 4. Everything in front of that rounding place is going to stay the same, but everything after the rounding place turns to a 0. In the next question, they're asking us to round to the thousands place. So we're going to look at our thousands place, it's a 9, and then we're going to look next door at the 8 to tell us, oh, we need to raise the score. Now that 9 becomes a 10, but we don't have enough space for 2 digits. So the 1 carries over and gets added to the next place value. So the 5 becomes a 6 and everything after it becomes a 0. For the next problem, let's first identify the 10,000s place. For this one, that is the 9. And we look to the 6 to help us round. The 6 tells us we need to raise the score, so the 9 becomes a 10, and the 1 gets carried over to the next place value. So now the numbers before the rounding place are 76, and then everything after that is replaced with zeros. So 7,600,000. Lastly, the 10,000s place. First, we find the 10,000s. In this case, it's the 8, and we look next door. Now, this time the neighbor is less than 4, or 4 or less, I should say. So we keep the 8 as it is. We don't round down, we just leave it the same, and then keep everything in front the same and turn everything after it to a 0. So that brings us to the end of part 1 of our chapter 1 review. Now in part 2, we will cover order of operations, expressions, and variables. So check out that video to make sure you've practiced everything you will see on the test. And don't forget to follow the rest of our study tips to make sure you are ready to show what you know on our big day. Great job. I'll see you later.